We all think we're alive, but most of us kind of phone it in, don't we? Who of us really is alive? And that's a question on the lips of young Emily in Thornton Wilder's Our Town. And she asks from the grave in a famous phrase, does anyone ever realize life while they live it? Every minute? To which the stage manager replies, no. Saints and poets, maybe. They do some. Well, some is not enough, I know. But it may be all we have in a given day. And it is that yearning to be alive that drags you here on a Sunday. Perhaps you think you'll be alive while you're here, but what we really want is to be more alive all the time, to be animated, to be present. And so when we get here on Sunday, we're hoping for a healing word or a hopeful piece of music or a kindly face, something to awaken us again. And for me, as I stand here, I am daunted every week by the yearning in every heart in this room to be alive. Because after all, I'm trying to get there myself. I'm just thinking now of a song by Kurt Weill, I'm just a stranger here myself. And so as I say every week, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. For I need all the help I can get to summon up what life there can be in these few moments we have together. I want to start with a story from last spring, late last spring. My wife Wendy and I were on our way down to North Carolina, not to visit Patrick Hamrick, which is where he's from, but to go to a meeting down there. And we spent the night driving all the way down in a town just south of Charleston, West Virginia. West Virginia is an amazing place. It's heartbreakingly beautiful and striking in every sense of the word. And before leaving, after rising that morning, we noticed there was a folk craft center nearby, and so we said, oh, we have time, let's go and see what they have. And they had the wood carvers and the painters and the weavers, all there, most of them professional, so very, very finely made. But they only had one workshop actually working at the hour we showed up at 9 o'clock. It was the glass blower. I had never thought of West Virginia as a glass blowing center, but apparently it is a glass making center. And there, of course, were the two workers. And there was the little furnace so hot that it was hard to look at the door when it opened up. And there was the apprentice or the younger worker who was creating the material to go in the furnace, and the older worker with the long tube that he stuck into the fire and pulled out this gelatinous mass that looked like petroleum jelly, but you knew was hundreds, if not thousands of degrees. And he began to rub it back and forth and blew a little air into it. And slowly through the air came this shape. Now, the other worker was not as excellent as the first worker. Like I said, he was feeding the furnace, but after a while, he got a pole too with a tube, and he got out a glob of glass and put it on the end. It's a long one because it's very hot. And he put it inside a mold, and he would blow into the mold, and the glass would expand. And then he'd take off the mold, and there would be one jar or bottle after another, all of them blown, but very similar because they had been blown inside this mold. And that's different from the other fellow who was making it without the mold at all. And I want you to keep that story in mind, because when people ask us, ask me or ask you, well, what's a liberal church anyway? The image that comes to mind sometimes is, well, we don't use a mold when we blow our glass. And I'll explain why that's true in a moment. I started with the word liberate last week. That behind liberal religion, and not only the word, but the concept is that we need to be free of external oppressions, whether they are political or economic, whether they even be religious. And people who come here want room to choose for themselves what they believe and how they will express it and what they can keep and what they can take away. And what I said last week was, that's great. We believe in it and we believe it's right for people and we uphold it. It's the one sacred truth we will not contravene. But it is not easy. That liberation is costly. It will mean that you give up as well as get. That it's difficult, it lasts a lifetime. That it's dangerous when you dare to be free in the world of people who are not. People will give you grief, if not trouble. And it's humbling when you discover that the truth that was out there was really very simple and you just hadn't seen it before. So if you're entering into a path of spiritual liberation, prepare for it to be costly, difficult, dangerous, and humbling. That said, you're all here, so I assume you've already signed up for those tasks. I want to go on to say, well, why do we want to be free? Because, you know, once you're free, then you have to stand around and say, well, gee, guys, what do I do now? Once you're no longer being controlled by your family or your country or other religions or something else, that doesn't answer the question of who you are supposed to be. That's important, because that's what being spiritually alive, what growing the soul, what Animate is about. And it turns out it's no more simple than being liberated, because you have to become something. You can't just be nothing. You got to be something, and no one's going to give you a book or a manual or a mold to put it in, because once you've thrown away the molds, you are now like the glass blower who has to figure out how to do it on your own, with your own breath and your own wiles and your own capacities, and it might not work. The Exodus story, which is what I talked about last week, is also instructive today. Moses and God liberated Israel for a larger purpose, not just to get them out of Egypt, but to do something. There's a great old phrase that I learned years ago. It was advice that said, don't be good for something. Likewise with freedom. Don't just be free for something. Be pointed towards something. And yes, freedom from slavery is important, but as we say in philosophy, when I thought I was philosophical, you learn the phrase necessary but not sufficient. In other words, you need that, but you need more. Liberation is essential to spiritual life, but that's not the whole story. You need more than liberation. We must be liberated for something, not just from something. And that story of Israel being freed from Egypt in order to become a people in covenant with God, that's the part people need to pay attention to. From this, for that. For you and me today, the same is true. We have to be liberated for something. We have to become truly alive as well as truly free. Maybe part of it is found in those words by Henry David Thoreau, who said, I do not wish to live what is not life, and not when I come to die, discover I have not lived. Isn't that it? That we don't want to reach the point where we say, damn, I could have had a V8. We don't want to regret having not done, not thought, not been, not acted in ways that we could have. We don't want a life of regrets, and that's where the liberation comes in. But that's also where the glass blower comes in, because you see, you're out there rolling your own and blowing it up, and what happens if it doesn't work? That's the challenge. The liberal religious principle is that we must be free to become something that only you and you and you and I can be. And yet there are no directions that we can rely upon. There's no one-size-fits-all mold into which all of us can be put. In fact, that would be so wrong that we can't even express it. What if every human being looked exactly alike? What if every river flowed in a straight line? What if every bird sang exactly the same song? What if the seasons came promptly at the solstices, left 6 inches of snow, and then went away and came back when we wanted them to? That kind of uniformity would be a form of hell, would it not? We need diversity in ourselves, in our friends, in our world. We want some creativity to exist. But when we take away the molds, there is the opportunity of failure, is there not? Of going down the wrong path, of breaking the glass on the stick, of blowing it so large that it cannot sustain itself. That's why this spiritual life thing is so scary. And I want to go back to fear. Remember I told you about fear last week. Thank Buzz Cucci for telling me that I got it right last week. I love it when my parishioners tell me I get it right. I wouldn't know if you didn't tell me. And that's the truth. I don't know unless you tell me when I get it right for you. A great clergy person of whom I'm fond, who died when I was a youngster, used a phrase that I have grabbed and put in front of you. He said, life is just a chance to grow a soul, not a guarantee. Take off the mold, you could get it all wrong, as I said. That chance means that, we could screw it up, as I've said. Another phrase I want to put in front of you is one from E. Cummings. I learned this years ago. It's of dubious providence that no one's ever seen it written with his hand, but everybody says he did. It sure sounds like him. He's said to have written this to a high school student.